Welcome to the second segment of 3 areas of opportunity for the lower back. I'm joined by Grace. Grace is one of our ATG staff. Check out the Women of ATG Instagram page. She does an unbelievable job with that. Grace was telling me about her favorite back exercises. Take it away. Help us out here.
So I find that the seated good morning paired with the couch stretch are a good way to kind of more directly train for the lower back, more direct maybe than like training your neck, but still less direct than having to suspend your weight on something like a back extension machine.
Great
because
point.
At least in my experience with disc injuries, suspending your weight, even like leaning over the counter to brush your teeth or something, is like one of the most painful parts of it.
And what is your experience with that? I should have better introduced it, but Grace is here because her big thing was the back, the same way knees were like, knees made me depressed. I don't know how far it got for you with your back.
Definitely. I mean, I had chronic disc injuries for 5 years or so, with re-injuries every probably 3 months. That would leave me like completely unable to walk. So I probably re-injured it 10 to 15 times over 5 years. So yeah, there's a lot that plays into it. Like, and that's why I agree so much with this like opportunistic approach, because the back affects so many other parts of your body and it is so central and related to everything else, that just creates an opportunity to train it and heal it from all these different kind of perspectives.
And that's what you told me, is you took you took an approach of gradually working toward the lower back. So
I had to start far away. I started with tib raises and KOT squats and stuff, and eventually had the kind of confidence and like trust that I wouldn't get injured again once I kind of like became more proximal to training the lower back.
I actually remember you like reaching out and saying how like Zero had like made so much progress for you with your back. And I was, even at the time, I was like, Zero for the back? Oh, that's interesting, because I was so used to thinking about the knee.
Yeah, right.
And now it's making more sense over time that you actually started improving all these areas, getting more flexible and stronger in all these little areas. So now this is our second segment. We're getting closer to the back. How do we get closer to the back?
Yes, so especially with these two, I find that they really reverse the effects of sitting, the way that we all sit and work or travel or whatever. So whether you are still in pain a little bit, I love the seated good morning for it because it's so scalable. Like, you can begin just opening everything up, having blood flow and circulation, and kind of practicing maintaining extension in the lower back with 6 inches of range of motion, or even with an incline bench propped up so that it stops you.
Let's show that.
Okay. So that it stops you from even like going any further than that.
So if you're at home with a chair, you could start at the edge of the chair as she was showing. If you're in the gym, you could actually give yourself a target and measure your progress this way.
Yes, exactly. But then obviously as you have the strength and ability in that range or range of motion, you can increase the range of motion, abs to bench or chair or whatever you're using, maybe in your house, and then eventually adding whatever weight, whether it's just starting with dumbbells, which dumbbells I feel like are such a safe option because you can just drop it. It's not like you have a barbell on your back and then you realize you're kind of stuck. Like, you can just use whatever you feel comfortable with and then eventually scale to something like.
Do you want to show a bar, or do you want me to show the bar?
You could show the bar today.
All right. So in ATG, we often just take clues from other areas. So I'll show like throwing some weight on here. And in the sport of Olympic weightlifting, where they have to explode with extremely heavy weights and then catch them in low positions, the mobility here. So for most people, when they're doing this, they're going to feel the inner thighs stretching. Well, let's say I had a twin brother whose squat was like this. Maybe this is an opportunity for the lower back. We can get it stronger while opening up the flexibility. So when I'm doing this, I'm not just seeing how much weight I can do. My intention, I'm thinking with those adductors, those inner thigh muscles, I'm trying to stretch them, hitting the bottom and going back up. So I now have an exercise to get my glutes, low back stronger, but getting more flexible through those inner thighs. Big shout out to Fernando's brother, Adon, who was like the best we'd ever seen on the seated good morning. And we would go to the basketball court and he'd be just like squatting and dunking. And we're like, what the heck? And I remember watching that and thinking, Was just a genetic freak, blah, blah, blah. Well, I started training my seated good morning, and combined with our ATG split squat, which we're going to show, I realized, oh my gosh, ATG split squat plus seated good morning is a squat. And now I can do the squat dunk. So,
And like probably half of my disc injuries were just like a moment of trying to do maybe an RDL or a squat or whatever, and you just flex. You know, it's like your back just, I couldn't maintain extension. Like I really had no strength with extension at all, whether it was, you know, I don't know.
and it's the mobility too. It's almost like whether you're bending down to pick something up or squatting or
Exactly.
doing weighted squats or whatever you're doing, the worse your seated good morning, or let's say the better it is, the easier because this is the closest, if you look at the thigh and the torso, the seated good morning is the closest exercise. So that means every exercise out just got a little bit safer. And now Grace is going to show us the couch stretch, which is almost like an opposing flow to what we just did and an opposing flow to sitting.
Yes. So this is still like indirect, as in it wouldn't, like if I was doing this in an injured or still in pain place, I wouldn't have fear of hurting myself again. And that was like, even just having that entry point is super profound for someone who is like still so deep in that cycle. And there is so much research about the hip flexor length in correlation to low back pain and things like that, of course.
Yeah, and so this, you'll probably already feel a stretch. You could even gradually lunge forward and stretch in a hip flexor. I wanted to get this visual showing me sitting while she's doing a couch stretch because, okay, let's say you go on a 5-hour flight, not to mention waiting before the flight, driving after. So now you're like 7-8 hours like this. So the whole point is that she's doing the opposite flow. This seated good morning, bear with me here, and Grace pointed this out, which is really cool. If this is sitting, seated good morning is now actively sitting. Like seated good morning is sitting with intention, and then couch stretch is the opposite of that. So boom, I asked her, because I was trying to figure out how do I break up these 9 zones. And I asked her this morning, I said, well, what are your big, like, what do you feel like are the most important for you for your lower back? She said, seated good morning, couch stretch. And I was like, huh. And so.
Especially in the case of like dealing with a flare up or kind of like having a hesitancy about direct low back training, like through a back extension or something like that.
So thank you, Grace. That was really brilliant. And I will show, because I mentioned the split squat is in the same category of what she's doing. Same category she's doing. And I think there's 2 really simple ways to get into this. Probably like just on a chair. I'll show it from this angle so we can see this stretching here. We're lengthening here. Like I'm not just like this. I'm actually trying to be engaged here. And you could do that 5-rep, 5-second hold. For someone more mobile though, you could probably get right in like this and get into it. And then I brought some dumbbells here to show, like, for me, this one is just like my king movement for my body of my knee health. Full range of motion. I'm stretching the back hip flexors. So for me, this is like, when I think about the lower back, I think like, oh, this is my number 1 favorite exercise. But if we look at that mobility and we add in the seated good morning, boom, there's our squat. So I thought this was a pretty cool section. Grace may have further tips on this, but the last part of this is that for some people, the outside of the hip is so tight that it actually restricts their ability to get into a deep squat. Best way I can relate this is, Alyssa, I wish she was here because she would laugh at me, because even once I was like fixing my knees, this was like the closest I could, like I couldn't sit like this because of my knee injuries. It had been probably a decade since I even tried. And so just by relaxing around the house in this position, working in here, so I'm opening up here. Seems like there's nerves that go
Definitely.
through here to the lower back.
Whenever my disc, like I would have re-injuries in the past, it would radiate all the way around. Every single, I never had sciatica, but it was always radiating through the hips. So that has always been helpful for me too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that's a finishing touch, and we get sent in messages of people like who were in a back problem, and they just started working on that stretch, and then they were, boom, back able to get around the house and doing fine. It's like, wow. So there's all these indirect areas. There's all these opportunities.
Yeah.
To recap here, the 3 opportunities we were talking about is we were talking about sitting with intention, seated good morning, and then balancing the opposite flow of that, couch stretch or ATG, ass to grass, or Athletic Truth Group. I have to define it, so you still get the questions. What is ATG? Look, we made the name. We wanted to call it like ass to grass to debunk of just stopping here. That's why I'm knees over toes guy. So yeah, check out the Women of ATG Instagram page. Thank goodness Grace came in for this video, because prior I hadn't connected all these dots. So this is the way it goes. This is why it's Athletic Truth Group. Otherwise, this video series would not have been as good.